You know, for well over a century, the United States has been involved in changing governments all around the world. We're talking about everything from full-blown military invasions to secret CIA plots. It's a history that's way more extensive than most of us realize. So in this explainer, we're going to unpack that historical record and really get into the how and the why America gets involved in other countries' business.
Okay, but before we dive in, let's get on the same page. What are we even talking about when we say regime change? It's a term that gets thrown around a lot, so let's start with a really clear definition.
At its core, it's pretty simple. It's the replacement of one government with another. And as we're about to see, the US has gone about this in two main ways. Overtly, out in the open with things like invasions, and covertly, which means it's all happening in secret.
And get this, it's happened way more often than you'd probably guess. To put a number on it, one study found 81 known U.S. interventions in foreign elections just in the 54 years between 1946 and 2000. Think about that for a second. That's more than one per year. It shows you just how common this has been as a tool of foreign policy.
So to get our heads around all this, we're going to take a trip through 5 distinct eras. We'll start with America's early expansion, move through the World Wars, into the long Cold War, and right up to the modern day. We're going to track how the goals and the methods have changed along the way.
All right, let's kick things off back in the 19th and early 20th centuries. This was a time when a young, growing America was really starting to flex its muscles, and it was focusing its power right in its own neighborhood and out across the Pacific.
The big idea driving everything back then was something called the Monroe Doctrine. It was basically the U.S. drawing a line in the sand, declaring the Americas its own sphere of influence, and telling European powers to stay out. Now, this was often the justification for interventions that were really all about protecting American business interests and cementing regional power.
And you can see this playing out all over the map. The U.S. backed the overthrow of Hawaii's own monarchy. It occupied Cuba after the Spanish-American War. It even supported Panama's split from Colombia, which, not coincidentally, helped secure the rights to build the Panama Canal. And in places like Honduras, U.S. troops were sent in again and again, all to protect American Fruit Company.
But then, the 20th century rolls around, and the world just explodes into two massive global conflicts. And for the U.S., this meant the whole game changed. The reasons for getting involved shifted, big time. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about fighting for an ideology on a global stage.
And you can really hear this shift in President Woodrow Wilson's famous words. Suddenly, the mission wasn't framed as being about profit, but about a principle, a global fight to make the world safe for democracy against the old monarchies and the new threat of authoritarianism.
I mean, during World War I, America's terms for peace actually required that the German Kaiser and the Austro-Hungarian Empire be dismantled. Fast forward to World War II, and the goal was nothing less than the total defeat and replacement of the regimes in Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan. And afterwards, the U.S. literally oversaw the creation of brand new democratic governments and constitutions in the very countries it had just fought.
Now, after World War II, the world didn't get peace. It got something else entirely: the Cold War. This became the new battlefield for U.S. intervention, a decades-long global struggle against a brand new ideological enemy, the Soviet Union.
And at the heart of American policy during this time was this one all-consuming fear, the domino theory. U.S. leaders genuinely believed that if one country fell to communism, its neighbors would automatically topple right after, just like a row of dominoes. And this theory was used to justify interventions all over the planet.
The sheer scale of what happened during this period is just staggering. One study counted at least 64 covert or secret attempts by the U.S. to overthrow foreign governments during the Cold War alone. This was a massive, hidden war fought in the shadows, all with the goal of containing Soviet influence.
So what did this new playbook look like? Well, the huge, open invasions of the world wars were mostly out. Covert action was in. This is really the golden age of the CIA. They used a whole new set of tools, things like propaganda, bribery, and backing local military coups to get what they wanted without having to declare an open war.
And you see this pattern just repeat itself across the globe. In 1953, the CIA helped engineer a coup in Iran to protect oil interests. Just 1 year later, they did it again, removing a democratically elected president in Guatemala. Now, some of these efforts failed spectacularly, like the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba in '61. But many others succeeded, like the US-backed coup in Chile in 1973. From Latin America to the Middle East, the strategy was pretty clear. Then, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. The Cold War was over,
And just like that, the main justification for all these U.S. interventions, it vanished. This kicked off a whole new era with a totally different set of stated goals.
You see, without the Soviet Union as the great rival, that central reason for getting involved, poof, it was gone. The U.S. needed a new public rationale for its actions, and its focus began to shift away from fighting communism and towards tackling a new set of threats.
So what did these new priorities look like? Well, in Iraq, the justification went from kicking an invading army out of Kuwait to later removing a dictator over supposed weapons of mass destruction. After 9/11, the war on terror became the #1 driver, which led directly to the invasion of Afghanistan to take out al-Qaeda and the Taliban. And in places like Libya, intervention was framed more around humanitarian crises and supporting a popular uprising. So, after this whole journey through more than a century of American history, what's the big takeaway? Let's take a step back and try to connect all the dots on this long, complicated road of U.S. foreign policy.
And this table here, it really pulls it all together beautifully. You can see the clear evolution. We started with economic interests and regional dominance, using direct military occupations. Then we shifted to the huge ideological battles of the world wars, fought with overt warfare. That was followed by the Cold War's laser focus on containing communism through secret, covert operations. And finally, we've landed in the modern era, with justifications like the War on Terror, carried out with large coalition invasions and high-tech airstrikes.
Which brings us to one final, really critical question. This long legacy of intervention, whether it succeeded or failed, has left a deep, deep mark on our world. It's shaped borders, it's created enemies and allies, and it's fueled resentments that are still very much alive today. So the real question for us, looking back at all this, is how do the echoes of this history still define the politics and the conflicts of our modern world?